Hello scoundrels, welcome back to the Scoundrel Den. I hope you're all having a lovely Saturday. Today we're going to be talking about speed tanking, but I've challenged myself to make a good video, like a really in-depth video about speed tanking, talking about the theory. So I have come up with some of these graphics that you're going to see today, and then we're going to do a brief little explanation and brief kind of showcase of me doing some speed tanking in nullsec in tier 6 anomalies. Thanks to G2A for sponsoring the channel. There's a reference link in the description below. So let's get on with the basics of transversal and angular velocity. The very core concepts when it comes to speed tanking. Today might seem a bit heavy in terms of information delivered, but it will help you understand the core concepts of speed tanking and why it works, which is also really important to learning how to play it. So there are two main factors that we take into consideration when dealing with speed tanking: transversal velocity and then, as such, angular velocity. Now, transversal velocity is your actual velocity in game minus your radial velocity, and radial velocity is the speed at which you are moving to or moving away from a target. So it's the speed at which the distance changes between two targets, and that could be zero. So if you are, it's never likely to be true zero, but it can be as close to zero as possible. If you are maintaining an orbit of, say, 10 kilometers and that's not changing on your screen, you can assume for the most part that your radial velocity is zero. Your transversal velocity is the speed, the measure of speed at which the object moves perpendicular to each other. The reason that radial velocity is important is because the higher that it is, the lower your transversal velocity is going to be. And the reason radial velocity would be high, we're going to cover that in another slide, is that if you're moving directly at a target, your radial velocity is going to be very high, and therefore your transversal velocity is going to be very low. And transversal velocity is purely the speed at which two objects move perpendicular to each other. So angular velocity is the core concept that we want to cover in this slide in particular. It's the speed at which two objects rotate around each other. And angular velocity, the calculation, is transversal velocity divided by the distance that you are from the target. This is the important stat for turret damage application and tracking speed. Now, the higher your transversal velocity and the closer you are to the target, obviously, the higher your angular velocity is going to be. So the very basic concept of speed tanking is if I go fast and I am close to you, my angular velocity is very high, and therefore I'm going to be harder to deal damage to and track. So let's take an example. We have a speed of 1500 meters per second. We're orbiting at a constant 5 kilometers, so we're going to assume that the radial velocity is 0. Our angular velocity is 300. If angular equals tracking speed, so let's say that we were going into a turret that had a tracking speed of 300. If your angular velocity equals the tracking speed, then your chance to hit is 50% with roughly 40% damage application. The higher you are, so the higher you are compared to tracking speed, then the harder you are going to be to hit and the harder you're going to be to deal damage to. Let's take, for example, a medium snub-nosed railgun. The tracking speed is 60. So if you are orbiting at 1500 meters per second at 5 kilometers, then you are 5 times quicker than the tracking speed, and that is obviously going to impact massively the chance to hit for a medium snub-nosed railgun. So let's go into some further concepts and discuss some theory when it comes to speed tanking. So we're going to move on to something that is more in-game related, and this is going to help you understand how to speed tank and how speed tanking is affected by what we just talked about a minute ago called, angular velocity. There are two ways of approaching a target when you are looking to engage in a speed tank scenario. The first of which is you can straight up run at them, like approach them. This is a direct head-on approach and does not take any transversal sort of angles into account. Or you can do something called the spiral technique, where you attempt to spiral around the target but slowly close that orbit distance. If you are going to approach a target head-on, you have to know that your angular velocity will be very low. That's because your radial velocity will be very high, and your overall transversal velocity will be very, very negligible. And if you head at them straight on and they head on you straight on, your angular velocity will be essentially 0. And this means that even if you have a small signature radius, there's a much higher chance for big turrets to hit you. And in a lot of cases, if you're in a frigate and they are firing medium or large guns at you, you may just end up dying. If you want to approach targets to speed tank, then you should look to try the spiral method. Now, this can be done manually by approaching at a 45-degree angle over and over again, or it can be done more easily by slowly reducing the orbit distance that you head at a target. So, for instance, you start off at a 40k orbit distance, but then very quickly and rapidly work your way down to a 20, and then down to a 10, and then down to a 5. What echoes will actually do for you, and I've actually noticed this, especially when you're sort of closing in on a distance that's relatively short, echoes will automatically give you a spiral-like approach when entering into an orbit pattern versus a target. And this is essentially to help players get into an orbit without having to do all the fancy bits beforehand. So echoes will actually do a lot of the work for you, but just be aware that especially if you're looking to close the orbit distance, it's good to start off orbiting at a higher a higher value, and then slowly reduce the orbit distance until you get into a comfortable speed tanking distance. Even if you're orbiting at 30 or 40k at high speeds, you will be taking reduced damage. And you've just got to very quickly move your way down to around 20k, and then down to 10k, and then down to 5k, and whatever distance that you plan to be at. Do be aware that when you're speed tanking, that if you are below 14k or so, you will be in danger of being webbed by mobs, and if you get double webbed, then you're probably just going to die. So just be aware that if you're speed tanking, webber fires are your worst nightmare, and slowing your speed when you are at even at a close distance is going to reduce your angular velocity by a lot, and that is unfortunately going to be one of the biggest demises of speed tanks in general. The abundance of webs, and the fact that if you get double webbed, it's going to really hurt your speed when trying to orbit something at a close pattern. So this is just a brief overview of kind of like speed tanking and why it matters in that sense. I just want to talk about how a stasis webber fire will end up affecting you when you are speed tanking. It's definitely your worst enemy when it comes to angular velocity. So we'll take the example from the first slide. 500 ms at 5 kilometers gives you 300. They're called radians per second, but for the sake of this video, I'm just putting angular. So 300 in terms of angular velocity. If you were to get webbed, which usually webs you for just over 50%, they're usually somewhere between like 52 and 55%, something like that. But let's just say you're going to go to about 730, which is just over half reduction at 5 kilometers. That's going to give you an angular velocity of 146. If you were to then try and move out of web range, and the average web range, thank you Captain Benzie for letting me know, is 11 kilometers. I didn't know if it differed from the usual ones that you can get on the market, but he assures me that the average web range of a standard rat is usually about 11 kilometers. So we're going to use 11 kilometers for this example. If you were to move out to 11 kilometers and try and escape the range of the web, your angular velocity would actually be lower than if you were webbed at 5 kilometers at 730. Now, obviously, this is important to note in the sense that, one web is usually dealable. Like, you can usually deal with one web in a PvE scenario, but 2 webs, that's where things get spicy, and that is where moving out to a range outside of your web range is going to be important, because your angular velocity is pretty similar at 11 kilometers at your full speed and 730 at 5 kilometers, for instance. So either, if you're going to get double webbed, you either want to move into a tighter orbit, or you want to move out to a broader orbit and try and escape web range. You also have to be aware that the ship that you're orbiting might not be the ship that is webbing you, and so you have to take that into account as well and try and judge distances on top of that. But I just wanted to add this little slide here to talk about how webs affect the angular velocity of your ship. Should we try a medium? So we could warp into a medium anomaly and give it a go. I've been doing smalls, but let's just warp into a medium anomaly and give it a go. This is just something that I know that a lot of people do pretty much AFK in a Condor. People do it in a slasher as well, just because it is relatively easy to do it without thinking. So PVE, we are going to lock, and then we're going to orbit this guy, and we're going to kill the burst ASAP. So the burst is going to go down. I imagine he's the one that's going to pop a stasis webber fire on me. No, it's the Thrasher this time. So we're going to kill the burst anyway. In this situation. Okay, now we're going to kill the Thrasher. Now, what I could display to you getting out of the webber fire range, and why I think that the the small missile launchers are in general better because I'm taking quite a bit of damage here. Now the booster is helping me out, but if I get out of a certain range, I should be able to free myself from the web of fire. And you can see now I'm actually out of the web of fire range, back up to a really good speed, and I still have range on him with my missiles. Like my missile range is 21.45 kilometers. So if I get out to 15 kilometers, I'm completely free of the web of fire range, and so the web of fire is no longer on me. And that's why I like small missiles compared to torpedoes. Torpedoes give you higher DPS, but overall, in my opinion, it's just better to have small missiles just because it does allow you to navigate away from webs, and when you're speed tanking, webs are your worst nightmare. And I didn't take much damage here at all. I probably, like I said, probably could have tanked my way through this, but nonetheless. Kill the Vigil. Great, and now we're just going to stick onto the cruiser. Is there any loot around here? Wow, everything dropped loot on this wave. That's crazy. I guess I'll just grab it on my way around. Loot. I'm just going to give this all over to my reprocessing alt. Loot. I think a warp core stabilizer actually sells for a decent amount of money. Okay, back to orbiting. I've got such a small signature radius, I'm not expecting to get hit. In fact, I'm so confident that I'm just going to go get a drink. Yeah, absolutely no problems. I didn't really expect it to be. Obviously, it takes you a little while to get through the cruisers. This is why, if you're looking to do anything more than tier 6 anomalies, like you're heading on towards battle cruisers and battleships, you're probably going to want something with a little bit more kick than a Condor 2. I'm currently training in my skills to be able to do expert frigate command, and the reason I want expert frigate command is because I want to be able to do speed tanking in a Hound. The Hound has a 5% velocity bonus per skill in expert frigate command, and that's able to equip medium torpedoes, so it's going to allow you to fight upwards versus some ships relatively easily. Just realised I've not got any music on right now, so I'm going to pump the music up a little bit. The Eve music. I can't hear the Eve music at all. I don't know why that is. Okay, we've got another wave here. So, I am going to orbit this guy. But I'm going to go PVE and check if anyone is webbing me. Absolutely no one is webbing me in this wave, so I have no issues whatsoever. I should put the... I'm getting my energy absorbed, but I'm a frigate, so I regen really quickly anyway. So no webs in this wave. No worries. No webs, no worries. It's a motto for life, right? And once we kill the frigates and then kill the Talwar as well, we shouldn't have too many issues. We're going really fast. We're a very fast boy. See what's in our frigate wrecks. Strike cannons. I mean, these things I can all reprocess relatively easily. I think the one thing that sells relatively well out of all of the stuff that I've looted is the warp core stabilizer. I think this actually goes for a decent amount of money. Yeah, it goes for like 400k. Not expecting magic from a level 6 anomaly. Could maybe try some level 7s. Okay, guys, I hope this helped you out. I hope you guys have learned something from today's speed tanking video. If you've liked the content, feel free to like and subscribe. It would really help me out. Cheers, guys. See you soon.